Welcome to the Drexel interview. I'm your host, Paula Morantz-Cohen, speaking to you from the university's Picture Gallery. Today our guest is Brian Tierney. He is the CEO of Philadelphia Media Holdings and the publisher and CEO of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Brian Tierney, welcome to the Drexel interview.
Paula, nice to be here with you.
Well, in 2006, you bought the Philadelphia Inquirer and Daily News when they were in a dire state from the McClatchy Company, which had bought them from Knight Ridder.
Right.
And this was a controversial move, which we can get into in a moment. But tell us about what prompted you at that moment in time to buy these newspapers.
Sure. Well, Knight Ridder, I guess, was the second largest newspaper chain in America, and they decided to sell and to put themselves up. And I knew, having run, I had a series of advertising and public relations firms in this marketplace in Philadelphia. So I knew of all of the media properties, television stations, radio stations, this was the most powerful voice. It was the one that my clients sold the most things through. Philly.com as well, Philadelphia Inquirer, Daily News, about 30 weekly newspapers. And I felt like we could turn around the advertising sales focus of it, be a little bit more creative and aggressive, and we could make some success there. So I put together a group of investors, really as diverse as the region, men and women, black and white, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, 4 independents, led by a union pension fund, the Carpenters Union, a guy named Bill Graham, insurance guy here in town, Bruce Toll, very successful businessman as well, Patricia and Basie, Les Brun. We put together this group of folks, and we purchased in June 29th of 2006 for $515 million. We purchased all the properties.
Well, I remember when this happened, and I remember, and I knew, and I know a lot of people on the Inquirer, and there was various views on the subject. There were those who felt very happy to have local buyers. And then there were those that were very worried to have a businessman, a non-newspaper man, and particularly a PR man buy the Inquirer. They were worried because a PR person is an advocate for a client, and a newspaper person is presumably an objective reporter. What did you say, and what do you say to critics on this score?
Well, it's a little easier now because I just say, look at the last 2.5 years,
Okay.
and I think everybody sees that in terms of the kinds of people that we've been able to attract, led by Bill Marimo, who, second to choosing my wife 28 years ago, was the second best pick I've made in my life. A 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner, ran National Public Radio. Before that, ran the Baltimore Sun. I brought Bill in about 1.5 years ago, a little longer than that, almost 2 years now. And with his credentials and the people he's been able to attract from the LA Times and the Washington Post and others. And I think they've seen that, first of all, I'm a zealous advocate. And the thing I'm advocating for now is this terrific journalism. And the role we play in this community, the 4th largest market in America, is unique. I mean, if we don't dig it out, if the Inquirer or the Daily News doesn't dig it out, it won't be dug out. And so I think people see now that, we have a lot of people with newspaper experience in the business. I think it's not a bad time for this industry to look outside, though, and find people who have different experiences, because, and I think that's one of the reasons that, although there's all kinds of challenges, relative to our peers, we've done quite well over the last 2 years.
Okay, I want to get to how the Inquirer is doing, but again, getting back to this notion of public relations versus reporting. And I wonder, it is true, I think, that you have shown that you understand, how the newspaper works, and you've been an advocate for the newspaper as a newspaper. But I wonder if you had a learning curve going to the Inquirer. Did you find the things that you assumed when you were an advocate for clients, pitching stories to the Inquirer, you saw differently now that you are on the other side, so to speak?
I think there's certainly truth to that, and I think that if I had a personal agenda, there would be a lot less expensive ways to express them, and I think that I said to somebody at one point, if I wanted to just express I would have started a blog or done something like that, and saved the $500 million. So and I knew coming in that that it's an incredibly important part of our community. So that's why I put together the group, which we're led by a Carpenters Union, a union pension fund. Nominally you would say probably Democratic leaning, right? The Carpenters Union pension fund's our largest investor, and then a non-union home builder in Bruce Toll, and Bill Graham, who is I guess nominally perhaps a Republican, although a big supporter of Democrats like Governor Rendell. And again, put it together from the get-go so that people would see this really reflected our region. I mean, if you looked at obviously successful men and women, mostly self-made, who were stepping forward to take this on. I think what people realize now is that I mean, I'm a businessman, and I also love this community. I've lived in Atlanta, I've lived in Washington. If all of us going into this knew this wouldn't be a Google-like return, our investor group, we set it up ahead of time. You can't interfere with the editorial product. Everybody accepted that. And that's why they went into it. The original return was going to be 12%, which nobody does those kind of deals because there's obviously a lot of risk. And we also said that it wasn't going to be Google. So, and you couldn't sell for 5 years, and then you could only sell back to investors and all those sorts of things. So a lot of really successful business people said, my God, that's such important work. I hope you're successful. But I don't invest in anything I can't flip in 2 years or 3 years. So we had people who came in it for the right reasons. And I think the proof has been in the pudding. And I think that in terms of the journalism now, I just saw some research 2 months ago, 6-1 people think the paper's better than the day we walked in the door.
Well, but you have had to do some very radical downsizing.
Not really. I always hear that.
There have been a lot of people let go on the Inquirer. What is it?
When I got there,
when
I got there, it was 412 people, and when we went there, we took it down to we took 65 or 67 people out, which and this past year we just added 7 new journalists covering mostly New Jersey and sports. So I don't think there's another newspaper in the United States that's added reporters this year. And so, lots of times, there is 3 months into it, we made those changes. Actually, 60 reporters out of a newsroom of 400 and some in this day and age is probably looking like you hardly dusted the surface of the furniture in terms of the cuts that have occurred everywhere you can imagine.
So you're being comparative here, compared to...
Well, and I'm also looking at the last, by doing the things that we did early on, we were able to be in a situation where we added this year. And also at the Daily News, from the get-go, we added people to it. So right now, with 440 or so journalists, you could add up all the television stations in this marketplace. They don't have that many journalists. The All News radio station has 34. You can add up all the newspapers in this marketplace, and we have a full-time architecture critic. We have 2 or 3 movie critics between the 2 papers. I mean, nobody has these things anymore.
You have cut back on the book section.
The book section, we do. We did certain things like people, and what I love about this business, I really truly do, is that people get so connected to it. So you feel a sense of ownership. So we recently combined the image section and the weekend entertainment section into one. All the columnists are there. Lisa Scottolini, who's been a great new voice, and Craig Laban, our restaurant, all those people are still there. There's not a word that was dropped. But combining them into one section and adding 4 or 5 pages to it, we saved $800,000 in production. So that's 8 to 10 journalists. So you have to make decisions now when, should we do that? I got letters from people saying, I can't believe you combined those 2 sections. But if we don't do that, if I can't find those savings, I mean, we've carved $68 million of costs out of the operation.
Why is this?
And only $6 million was journalists.
Why this need to make savings? I mean, this is not you particularly. I mean, this is across the country. The New York Times just did the same thing with its consolidation. What is it about newspapers then? Are they losing money, or is it, as I've heard, that the profits are just not as great as in other areas, and therefore the need to cut back is brought into play? Yeah, I mean, it is, I think, again, that connection to newspapers, so you see it. Number one is for the publicly traded companies. If you and I bought the New York Times, if you and I 2 years ago put $100 in the New York Times and now it's worth, say, $50, and it was our pension money, we'd be like, gee, I want you to fix that. And they don't want to hear, well, isn't the mission really important? Well, then become a nonprofit then or something. But if you're going out there and so people have, and I understand that, and if it was our pension money, we would, and in fact, what happens is the real problem is not so much the profitability has dropped that much, although it has, but the multiple, not to get into a real stock thing, is gone from 12 times earnings to 6 times earnings. So the stock has really been hurt by that. Bottom line is this, I saw recently Yahoo laid off people. Google announced earnings. But nobody notices it, the same way that you notice when you hear about it in your newspaper. And I'm not sure exactly why that is. I saw NBC Broadcast is laying off 15% of their employees. I think it was 15, it could be 10, it was something like that number. But those numbers get added into the General Electric numbers, which are
aircraft engines, I mean, all these other things. Then there's this thing called NBC. Then there's the broadcast news division. I love the quote. When early on in this new career, I went into the Washington Post, and in the lobby, there's a quote from Katharine Graham that says, "Profitability and quality journalism go hand in hand." That's the fact. If you don't, would you want to go to a hospital, let's say, that somebody said, there's 2 hospitals. You've had an emergency, Mr. Tierney. Where would you like to go? There's this hospital here that has been in the red for the last 7 years. They've had to, they're hemorrhaging cash. So there's the other one where they're making some money, they're able to invest, they have all new equipment. Where would you rather go? You'd say, take me to that hospital. And the same way in our business, too. For us to invest back in, we've put $4 million in the plant. We've put $5 million into online. Our online traffic is up 300% since we got there. You can't do that. I mean, we print newspapers. I joke out there, we don't print cash. So to do those things, I have to be a good steward of the business. And I don't want to be in a situation the way some media organizations have done, the newspapers that have had to make draconian cuts. So if we're smart now in terms of investing in marketing, investing in things that are important, at the same time finding ways to save, then we can have a bright future in the future.
Okay, I guess, though, getting back to your point about how when Google lays off or when some television station lays off, we don't hear, but we do focus on newspapers laying off people.
And our newspapers, reporters. I mean, what has been the biggest story in broadcast for the past year? I'm going to say Katie Couric and her at least apparent failure as a... CBS has never done a story on that. Think of that. CBS television has never done a story on Katie Couric. And that's the biggest story, which is why newspapers have such credibility. Anything, the smallest sparrow falls in our sky, and we put it... I joked to our folks, I said, when our circulation last fall was #1 in the United States in terms of increase, we're up 7,000. It was on page 3 of my business section.
So you're saying that it's because newspapers themselves
there's no doubt about
print this sort of information. But wouldn't you also say it is because we have a sense that print journalism is under threat? I mean, even the fact
journalism's
that you said...
under threat. Journalism's under threat. I mean, Brian Williams, here, let me give you a number. Brian Williams, #1 NBC National News. His audience is around 8 million. I know this stuff from the advertising business. Is about 8 million. 2 years ago, he was #1. His audience was 11 million. That means they've had to cut journalists. And that's why there's fewer ads, and they're all from pharmaceutical companies. But you don't see Brian Williams starting the broadcast by saying, ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, we're still #1. I've lost 1/3 of my audience. Rending his garments. But I guarantee you, if the New York Times or the Philadelphia Inquirer or the Washington Post had that situation, they would feel important. And I don't criticize it. I think it's at the core of why print journalists have such credibility. I mean, quite frankly.
Right.
It's the day that we discovered that 23 children in Philadelphia had died in the care of the Department of Human Services, and it took 6 journalists 6 months to do that, which probably cost us $300,000 to do that story. And maybe there wouldn't have been a story in the end or not, which is, from this business, that's what happens. Sometimes you have totally dry holes. That same day, some of the major stories in this market was, a tractor trailer jackknifed that was on television. I mean, those are inexpensive stories to cover. We had a situation not too long ago where a local district attorney wanted to turn over the notes of one of our reporters. We fought it. We won. We spent $45,000 in fighting that. A local television station had the same issue. They immediately turned over their notes. I said to the general manager, why did you turn over your notes? It's just in principle. Didn't you want to fight that? He said, New York told us when we have these things, we don't want to spend the legal fees.
Okay.
So here we are as local owners with a profit margin of about 12%, fighting for something that's really essential as Americans. And I think that's something that we as Americans have to...
I guess I would grant you that the issue isn't between television and newspapers, but rather between print journalism or